Chapter 20. The Leveler. Zack knew only too well that the Leveler would flatten FernGully, but as hard as he tried, he could not persuade the fairy folk to leave. The Leveler was an extremely efficient machine. It could level whole sections of the forest in less time than it took dozens of machines to do the same job. When Zack had first seen it, he'd been impressed. It was built to chop, cut, saw, and stack timber as it crawled along on its wide caterpillar tires, and it could travel through any terrain at a surprisingly fast speed for its gigantic size. It was being tested out in the rainforest, and everyone who'd worked with it agreed that its performance was faultless. Zack knew the forest didn't have a chance of surviving the Leveler. He hadn't thought when he came to work at the logging camp during his school holidays that this machine would end up killing him, for he knew that if he stayed with the fairy folk, he would almost certainly die. But when he tried to tell everyone of the overwhelming odds against them, no one would listen. "This is our home," said Gyps. "We'll stay and fight."
"We will not run away,"
agreed Grandfather Ash. "But what will you fight with?" argued Zack. "Your wings?"
"No,"
said Crysta quietly.
"We'll use the power of this forest. If we face the machine and Hexxus together..."
But her words were cut short as the ground trembled again and the sky darkened. And they all knew Hexxus was leading the Leveler straight towards them. Inside Old High Rise, baby birds and tiny animals huddled together as the huge tree swayed and groaned. Rose Myrtle and Granny Belladonna tried to calm the baby fairies, while Silky played mother to a cluster of Rose Robin chicks who were hungry and squawking for food. Baby geckos, miniature frogs, and tiny snakes were crowded together beside newborn echidnas and marsupial mice. Patty looked huge compared to most of them. Only young Poss and Gloss were anywhere near his size. Many of the young were already injured, and Mother Ash was busy attending to as many as she could.
"What's that noise?"
whimpered Trina Echidna.
"Why is the earth moving?"
cried Patty.
"It's all right. We're safe in here,"
replied Rose Myrtle in her best no-nonsense voice.
"Hope she's all right,"
whispered Fern, stroking a frightened baby caterpillar.
"What if it's the end of the world? Where do we go from here?"
"The elders will think of something,"
replied Lily.
"But have you seen Hexxus?"
said Fern.
"He's enormous!"
Lily's reply was drowned out by the battle raging outside. The forest was fighting back, but it was a losing battle. The birds flocked together and rigged up an elaborate maze of interwoven vines. The trees interlocked their branches and formed a barricade against the Leveler. But the huge machine just ripped through the vines and cut the trees down. The Beetle Boys arrived with their whole gang and charged at Hexxus. They flew around his head in tight circles, buzzing in and out of his ears to distract him, while the others tried to halt the massive machine. Batty Coda joined the Beetle Boys. "Rip Snort, we're fanging on the wild side now. Let's eliminate his Master Blaster!" But Batty was no match for Hexxus. He was quickly hurled to earth, bleeping furiously. The Leveler was now advancing towards Old High Rise at a steady pace. Zack knew the hopelessness of the situation. He knew there was nothing anyone in the forest could do to stop this killing machine. But he knew there was something he could do.
"Zack."
Without a thought for his own safety, Zack ran through a thick wall of smoke towards the machine, not seeing the machine's scissor hands snapping at him. If Batty Coda hadn't swooped in and scooped him up, he would have been sliced in two.
is the last time I save you, human.
Said Batty, dodging the fireballs Hexxus was blasting all around them. But Zack didn't want to be carried to safety. He wanted to get inside the machine.
No, Batty, take me back to the leveler. Are you crazy? That's lemming talk.
Shrieked Batty.
Wrong channel. Oh, Caesar, Emperor of Rome. Wrong channel. Well, all right, Gummy. We're going to war. Yes, that's it. Back to the camp, Batty. Let's go. Lock and load, gentlemen. Time to rock and roll.
There, above that doorway, shouted Zack. Batty circled the leveler, but was sent spinning when Hexxus lashed out at the Beetle Boys and winged Batty instead. Zack was hurled from Batty's grasp and thrown against the leveler's oily windshield. He slid down it.
Hey, Kong, there's a little man on the windshield here.
Tony, Ralph, it's me, it's Zack!
But before he dropped to almost certain death underneath the machine's caterpillar tires, he managed to grab a windscreen wiper and stop his fall. He clung to the blade and pounded on the windshield in the hope that the men driving the leveler would see him. The men did notice something, so they turned on the windscreen wipers for a better look. Zack suddenly found himself riding the blade. He knew he couldn't hold on for very long, especially when Hexxus circled the giant machine and began to shake it. Then, everything seemed to happen at once. The two men inside the leveler saw Hexxus for the first time.
Keep it moving, boy.
They screamed at the hideous, distorted face leering at them through the windscreen, dripping globs of oil. They opened the cabin door, falling over each other to get away from the nightmare creature towering above their machine, and abandoned the leveler. They ran off into the forest screaming. Unable to hold on any longer, Zack started to slide down the windscreen. To his surprise, Pip suddenly appeared out of the smoke and yanked him to safety. With Pip's help, he managed to scramble inside the cabin.
Here's your first flying lesson, Zack.
Thanks!
Gasping for breath, he summoned his last reserves of strength and crawled across the oil-splattered control panel. Slipping and sliding, he reached the huge ignition key and managed to turn it to off. The leveler immediately shuddered and stopped. Its saw blades were grinding to a halt just in front of Old High Rise. Hexxus froze. Then, in a fury of blind rage, he smashed at the leveler, trying to restart it. Zack dived out of the door as the cabin crashed around him. Once again, Pips flew to his rescue, trying to cushion his fall. But Zack was heavier, and the two of them plummeted towards the ground. "This is incredible!" shrieked Batty, scooping them up before they hit the ground. "It's gravity gross-out time!" But before they could escape, Batty was hit by a piece of flying metal.
Oh, no!
Pips and Zack were flung to safety, but Batty crash-landed. The last they saw of him was the tip of his wing poking out from under a huge chunk of twisted steel plating.